This is a TLC recording. The Clue by Carolyn Wells. Chapter 12. Dorothy Burt. The people rose slowly from their chairs, and most of them looked as if they did not quite comprehend what it all meant. Among these was Carlton himself. He seemed oblivious to the fact that he was, at least tacitly, an accused man, and stood quietly as if awaiting any further developments that might come. "Look at Schuyler," said Kitty French to Fessenden. The two had withdrawn to a quiet corner to discuss the affair, but Kitty was doing most of the talking, while Fessenden was quiet and seemed preoccupied. "Of course I suppose he must have killed Madeline," went on Kitty, "but it's so hard to believe it, after all. I've tried to think of a reason for it, and this is the only one I can think of. They quarreled yesterday afternoon, and he went away in a huff. I believe he came back last night to make it up with her, and then they quarreled again and he stabbed her." Fessenden looked at her thoughtfully. "I think that Hunt man testified accurately," he said. "And if so, Carlton was in the house just 15 minutes before he gave the alarm. Now, 15 minutes is an awfully short time to quarrel with anybody so desperately that it leads to a murder." "That's true, but they both have very quick tempers. At least Madeline had. She didn't often do it, but when she did fly into a fury, it was as quick as a flash. I've never seen Mr. Carlton angry, but I know he can be, for Maddie told me so." "Still, a quarter of an hour is too short a time for a fatal quarrel, I think. If Carlton killed her, he came here for that purpose, and it was done premeditatedly." "Why do you say if he killed her? It's been proved she didn't kill herself. It's been proved that no one could enter the house without a latchkey, and it's been proved that the deed was done in that 1 hour between 10:30 and 11:30, so it had to be Mr. Carlton." "Miss French, you have a logical mind, and I think you'd make a clever little detective, but you have overlooked the possibility that she was killed by someone in the house." "Some of us?" Kitty's look of amazement almost made Fessenden smile. "Not you or Miss Gardner," he said, "but a burglar might have been concealed in the house." "I never thought of that!" exclaimed Kitty, her eyes opening wide at the thought. "Why, he might have killed us all." "It isn't a very plausible theory," said Fessenden, unheeding the girl's remark, "and yet I could think of nothing else. Every instinct of my mind denies Carlton's guilt. Why, he isn't that sort of man." "Perhaps he isn't as good as he looks," said Kitty, wagging her head wisely. "I know a lot about him. You know he wasn't a bit in love with Maddie." "You hinted that before. And was he really a mere fortune hunter? I can't believe that of Carlton. I've known the man for years." "He must have been, or else why did he marry her? He's in love with another girl." "He is? Who?" "I don't know who, but Madeline hinted it to me only a few days ago. It made her miserable, and that's why everybody thought she wrote that paper that said, 'I love S, but he does not love me.'" "And you don't know who this rival is?" "No, but I know what she's like. She's the clinging rosebud effect." "What do you mean?" "Just that. You know Madeline was a big, grand, splendid type, majestic and haughty, and she thought Schuyler loved better some little timid girl who would sort of look up to him and need his protection." Fessenden looked steadily at Miss French. "Are you imagining all this?" he said. "Or is it true?" "Both," responded Kitty with a charming little smile. "Maddie just hinted it to me, and I guessed the rest. You know I have detective instinct too, as well as you." "You have indeed." And Rob gave an admiring glance to the pouting red lips and the roguish eyes. But tell me more about it." "There isn't much to tell," said Kitty, looking thoughtful, "but there's a lot to deduce." "Well, tell me what there is to tell, and then we'll both deduce." It pleased Kitty greatly to imagine she was really helping Fessenden, and she went glibly on. "Why, you see, Maddie was unhappy. We all know that. And it was for some reason connected with Schuyler. Yet they were to be married all the same. But sometimes Maddie has asked me, with such a wistful look, if I didn't think men preferred little, kittenish girls to big, proud ones like herself. And you, being a little, kittenish girl, said yes?" "Don't be rude," said Kitty, flashing a smile at him. "I am kittenish in name only, and I am not little." "You are, compared to Miss Van Norman's type." "Oh, yes, she was like a beautiful Amazon. Well, she either had reason to think, or she imagined, that Schuyler pretended to love her, and was really in love with some dear little clinging rosebud." Clinging rosebud, what an absurd expression! And yet, by Jove, it just fits her. And Miss Van Norman said to me, "Oh, I say, Miss French, don't you know who the rosebud is?" "No," said Kitty, wondering at his sudden look of dismay. "Well, I do. Oh, this is getting dreadful. Come outside with me and let's look into this idea. I hope it's only an idea." Throwing a soft fawn-colored cape around her, and drawing its pink-lined hood over her curly hair, Kitty went with Fessenden out on the lawn and down to the little arbor where they had sat before. "Did you ever hear of Dorothy Burt?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "No. Who is she?" "Well, she's your clinging rosebud. I'm sure of it, and I'll tell you why." "First, tell me who she is." "She's Mr. Carleton's companion. Schuyler's mother, you know. She lives in the Carleton household, and she is the sweetest, prettiest, shyest little thing you ever saw. Clinging rosebud just fits her." "Indeed!" said Kitty, who had suddenly lost interest in the conversation. And indeed, few girls of Kitty's disposition would have enjoyed this enthusiastic eulogy of another. "I don't admire that sort myself," went on Rob, who was tactfully observant. "I like a little more spirit and vivacity." Kitty beamed once more. "But she's a wonder of her own class. I was there at dinner last night, you know, and I saw her for the first time, and though I thought nothing of it at the time, I can look back now and see that she adores Schuyler. Why, she scarcely took her eyes off him at dinner, and she ate next to nothing. Poor little girl, I believe she was awfully cut up at his approaching marriage." "And what was Schuyler's attitude toward her?" Kitty was interested enough now. Fessenden looked very grave and was silent for a time. "It's a beastly thing to say," he observed at last, "but if Schuyler had been in love with that girl and wanted to conceal the fact, he couldn't have acted differently from the way he did act." "Was he kind to her?" "Yes, kind, but with a restrained air, as if he felt it his duty to show indifference toward her." "Was she with you after dinner?" Fessenden thought. "I went to my room early, and Mrs. Carleton had then already excused herself. Yes, I left Schuyler and Miss Burt in the drawing-room, and later I saw them from my window, strolling through the rose garden." "On his wedding eve!" exclaimed Kitty, with a look akin to horror in her eyes. "Yes, and I thought nothing of it, for I simply assumed that he was devoted to Miss Van Norman, and was merely pleasant to his mother's companion. But in view of something Miss Van Norman said to me yesterday, can it be it was only yesterday, the matter becomes serious." "What did she say?" "It seems like betraying a confidence, and yet it isn't, for we must discover if it means anything. But she said to me with real agitation, 'Do you know Dorothy Burt?' At that time I hadn't met Miss Burt, and had never heard of her, so I said, 'No, who is she?' 'Nobody,' said Miss Van Norman, 'less than nobody. Never mention her to me again. Her voice, even more than her words, betokened grief and even anger, so of course the subject was dropped. But doesn't that prove her anxious about the girl, if not really jealous? Of course it does, said Kitty. I know that's the one that has been troubling Madeline. Oh, how dreadful it all is. And then, too, Fessenden said, still reminiscently, Miss Van Norman said she wanted to go away from Mapleton immediately after her wedding and never return here again. Did she say that? Then of course it was only so that Schuyler should never see the Burt girl again. Poor dear Maddie, she was so proud and so self-contained. But how she must have suffered. You see, she knew Schuyler admired her and respected her and all that, and she must have thought that, once removed from the presence of the Rosebud girl, he would forget her. But I can't understand old Schuyler marrying Miss Van Norman if he didn't truly love her. You know, Miss French, that man and I have been staunch friends for years, and though I rarely see him, I know his honorable nature, and I can't believe he would marry one woman while loving another. He didn't, said Kitty, in a meaning voice that expressed far more than the words signified. Fessenden drew back in horror. Don't, he cried. You can't mean that Schuyler put Miss Van Norman out of the way to clear the path for Miss Burt. I don't mean anything, said Kitty, rather contradictorily. But as I said, Maddie was not killed by anyone inside the house. I'm sure of that. And no one from outside could get in, except Schuyler. And he had a motive. Don't you always, in detective work, look for the motive? Yes, but this is too horrible. All murders are too horrible, but I tell you it must have been Schuyler. It couldn't have been Miss Burt. Don't be absurd. That little girl couldn't kill a fly, I'm sure. I wish you could see her, Miss French. Then you'd understand how her very contrast to Miss Van Norman's splendid beauty would fascinate Schuyler. And I know he was fascinated. I saw it in his repressed manner last evening, though I didn't realize it then as I do now. I have a theory, said Kitty slowly. You know Mr. Carleton went away yesterday afternoon rather angry at Maddie. She had carried her flirtation with Tom a little too far, and Mr. Carleton resented it. I don't blame him. The very day before the wedding. But it was partly his fault too. Well, suppose he went home, rather upset over the quarrel, and then seeing Miss Burt and her probably mild angelic ways, I'm sure she has them, suppose he wished he could be off with Maddie and marry Miss Burt instead. But he wouldn't kill his fiancée if he did think that. Wait a minute. Then suppose after the evening in the rose garden with the gentle, clinging little girl, he concluded he never could be happy with Maddie, and suppose he came at 11 o'clock or whatever time it was to tell her so and to ask her to set him free. On the eve of the wedding day, with the house already in gala dress for the ceremony? Yes, suppose the very nearness of the ceremony made it seem to him impossible to go through with it. Well, and then suppose he did ask Madeline to free him, and suppose she refused. And she would refuse. I know her nature well enough to know she never would give him up to the other girl if she could help it. And then suppose when she refused to free him, you know he has a fearfully quick temper, and that awful paper cutter lay right there, handy. Suppose he stabbed her in a moment of desperate anger. I can't think it, said Rob after a pause. I've tried and I can't. But suppose all you say is true as far as this. Suppose he asked her to free him because he loved another, and suppose she was so grieved and mortified at this that in her own sudden fit of angry jealousy, you know she had a quick temper also, suppose she picked up the dagger and turned it upon herself, as she had sometimes said she would do. Kitty listened attentively. It might be so, she said slowly. You may be nearer the truth than I, but I do believe that one of us must be right. Of course, this leaves the written paper out of the question entirely." "That written paper hasn't been thoroughly explained yet," exclaimed the young man. "Now look here, Miss French, I'm not going to wait to be officially employed on this case, though I am going to offer Carlton my legal services. But I mean to do a little investigating on my own account. The sooner inquiries are made, the more information is usually obtained. Can you arrange that I shall have an interview with Miss Dupuy?" "I think I can," said Kitty. "But if you let it appear that you're inquisitive, she won't tell you a thing. Suppose we just talk to her casually, you and I. I won't bother you." "Indeed you won't. You'll be a first-class help. When can we see her?" While they had been talking, other things had been happening in the drawing-room. The people who had been gathered there had all disappeared, and, under the active superintendence of Miss Morton, the florist men who had put up the decorations were now taking them away. The whole room was in confusion, and Kitty and Mr. Fessenden were glad to escape to some more habitable place. "Wait here," said Kitty as they passed through the hall, "and I'll be back in a moment." Kitty flew upstairs and soon returned, saying that Miss Dupuy would be glad to talk with them both in Madeline's sitting room. End of Chapter 12. Please click the link below to continue on to Chapter 13. This has been a TLC recording. Thank you for listening, and please be sure to subscribe.